This is a podcast about new crops. You're going to love it. Join us on The Cutting Edge, a podcast in search of new crops for Wisconsin. Welcome, everyone, to The Cutting Edge, a podcast in search of new crops for Wisconsin. I'm Jason Fischbach, one of today's co-hosts. I'm the agriculture agent up in Ashland and Bayfield counties, and joining me today is Jerry Clark.
Hey, good morning, Jason. Yes, I'm Jerry Clark, Chippewa County agricultural agent with the Division of Extension in UW-Madison.
Awesome. Jerry, we had frost last night. First time this season.
Yeah, we're in that tough. We didn't have any this far south. I know you're in the northern border there, Jason, but it's always that time of year when you don't know if you should turn the furnace on or not. So you try to suffer through a few cold days until it warms back up again.
Yeah, that's right. Got to get to October before we turn our heater on. That's our rule.
That's our rule here too. So a few of these mornings are a little cool, but
that's right. Yep,
does feel good.
Well, we've got a great episode today. I think chestnuts are one of these new crops that have a lot of momentum. There's a lot of interest, and it's a crop that we call it new, but the reality is this is probably one of the original crops, if you will, for North America in terms of human consumption. Chestnuts, especially American chestnut. Chestnuts used to grow everywhere, not so much anymore because of chestnut blight, but it's gaining some new excitement, I think, as a crop, as some new genetics and pioneering growers are starting to make it a reality. So with that, just want to introduce our guest today is Tom Wahl. He's the owner of Red Fern Farm in Iowa, southeast Iowa, and has been growing chestnuts for a number of years, and along with all kinds of other great crops. And Tom's a true pioneer in trying to help diversify our agricultural landscape. I've had a chance to hear Tom talk and interact with him over the years. It's just a breath of fresh air to have that kind of energy and vision in agriculture, because, we sometimes sort of think that there are only X number of crops that can be involved in agriculture. And the reality is our planet is full of all kinds of amazing plants and genetics and even our own backyard that we sometimes ignore. So chestnuts is one of those that I'm hoping continues to grow and develop. So Tom, can you introduce yourself and welcome, I should say, introduce yourself and Red Fern Farm and say a little bit about, how and why you're involved in chestnuts right now.
Okay. I'm Tom Wahl from Red Fern Farm, as Jason said. As to why I'm growing chestnuts, it's a really long, boring story. I guess I'll give you the short version. My background is in natural resource conservation, and I realized that early on that most of the problems that natural resource conservationists have to deal with are a direct result of problems caused by modern industrial agriculture. And I decided agriculture needed to be reinvented, and this is the result.
So what you're Red Fern Farm, what are you growing these days?
Now, I have to have a list in front of me to cover it all.
Yeah, maybe what aren't you growing?
Well, I am not growing fruits and nuts that are not adapted to a temperate climate. So no bananas, no mangoes, no papayas, but virtually every other fruit and nut that will grow in our climate, we've at least tried.
So as permaculture is something that we always talk about as far as these perennial trees, plants. Is that kind of where your focus is, or do you plant some annuals as well?
I don't do much at all with annuals. I do have some perennial vegetables, though, but mostly fruit and nut, trees, shrubs, and vines.
And are you involved in, tell us more about your business. I think you're selling plants in addition to harvesting and selling nuts and fruits too. Just tell us more about it.
We actually got into the nursery business so that we wouldn't have to pay so much to plant our trees, shrubs, and vines. And then as a natural consequence of being in the nursery business, we started selling nursery stock to other people to help them get started with perennial crops. Our most important crop is chestnuts by multiple orders of magnitude. And also in our nursery business, the chestnut nursery stock is the most important, more important than all the rest put together by multiple orders of magnitude again.
Mm-hmm. And so by chestnuts, are you talking Chinese chestnuts, American chestnuts? Maybe give us a background on, for those that don't know much about chestnuts, what's available that could be grown in the Midwest?
Mostly Chinese chestnuts, also Chinese American hybrids for the northern edge of the potential commercial chestnut range. We do have a few hybrids that include other species, but by far and away Chinese chestnuts the most important. And again, the Chinese American hybrids for extra cold hardiness at the north end of the range.
Okay. And are these mainly seedlings, meaning grown from seed, or are there clonal varieties that are available for growing?
Yes, there are clonal varieties, cultivated varieties or grafted trees available. However, those are useful for breeding purposes, but they are not useful for nut production, at least in our area. Seedling trees will outproduce grafted trees in our area by 500 to 600%.
Wow. So in Michigan, I think there's one called Colossal, if I remember right. Is that a hybrid variety? Is that just not hardy, or is that?
Colossal is a hybrid. It's a Japanese-European hybrid. Japanese and European chestnuts and the hybrids between them are really not well adapted to a continental climate, and they are struggling with Colossal in Michigan, and I believe they are phasing it out and looking for alternatives. They should be looking at Chinese chestnuts, but for various reasons they aren't. But Chinese chestnut is the one that's adapted to continental climate, and it's also the most resistant to the most serious disease pests of chestnuts, like chestnut blight and Phytophthora.
So Tom, are most of your plants going for production, nut production, or are some people buying your plants to try to reforest an area, or is it mainly just production?
I'm not aware of anyone trying to use Chinese chestnuts for reforestation. Okay. It's not really an appropriate species for that purpose.
Is there a longevity to the Chinese chestnut as far as how long will that tree survive?
Well, there are Chinese chestnuts in China that are over 1,000 years old and still producing big crops of nuts. So yes, just like American and European chestnuts, they are potentially a long-lived
Yeah,
tree.
I was just curious if it's something just for production, that it's going to be, a 30, 50-year tree and then it kind of runs out of gas, kind of like our apple trees tend to do.
Nope, nothing like apple trees.
All right, sounds good.
And how big will the Chinese chestnuts get, say, where you grow them in Iowa?
Well,
I guess you don't know yet. 9,000 years old.
Ask me in 500 to 600 years, and I'll be able to tell you.
Yeah. All right. So how big are they now, and how old are they?
I think the biggest ones right now are probably between 30 and 40 feet tall, and the same width.
Okay. So they're a substantial tree. It's not like a hazelnut bush or something.
Yes, they will get to be big trees. The literature says they'll get 40 feet tall and 40 feet wide, but I've seen photos of them much bigger than that. Not from Iowa, but I think on our Iowa soils, I think they're going to get even bigger still than the photos I've seen.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So how are they grown? Kind of walk us through maybe the first 10 years.
The very first step is to find out if you even have a site suited to chestnuts. They do need a well-drained soil on the acid side of the pH scale, and neither of those are negotiable. pH can be amended with soil amendments like elemental sulfur, as long as the pH isn't too high. But for the trees to grow, they do need a pH of 6.5 or lower.
Okay.
And poorly drained soil absolutely does not work. And we found that out definitively last year. Now, the next step is to find good quality nursery stock, and slick, glossy color nursery catalogs are not a good source for that material. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of good sources for Chinese chestnuts for commercial nut production out there, but there are a few.
Is it typically planted bare it dormant in the spring, or can you plant leaf on sometime in the growing season?
You can plant potted nursery stock anytime between when the frost goes out of the ground in the spring up until the ground freezes. Although if you plant after mid-September, you have to mulch really well with coarse wood chips to prevent frost heaving. Got it. And there's a lot of discussion and argument over spacing. And I've been recommending the spacing of 20 by 20 for many years, because that's the spacing at which the chestnut trees will occupy an acre of land at about the time they're coming into nut production. But other people are arguing that that spacing is too close because they have to be thinned. And yes, they do have to be thinned. By the time they're 20 years old, they have to be thinned to 40 by 40, and then they probably have to be thinned again somewhere around year 50 or 60, thinned to 80 by 80, and then probably one final thinning around year 500. But if you plant them at 40 by 40 to start with, you'll be losing a lot of nut production in the early years for two reasons. One, because the trees won't be occupying the space when they come into production, and also because the pollen doesn't move very far from one tree to another, and they have to have cross-pollination in order to reproduce. So the pollination efficiency is much lower at 40 feet than it is at 20 or 30.
Gotcha. So what size, not size, but age nursery stock is usually planted these days? Or what are the nurseries selling? Are these, 1 year old?
Yeah, I think most nurseries are selling 1-year-old nursery stock.
Okay. So if I plant, say in the fall, 1-year-old stuff, when might I expect my first nut crop, if all goes well? Which it never does. Well, that's determined by multiple factors, including the genetics of the stock, the type of soil they're planted on, the effectiveness of your weed control, and whether or not you're using a 5-foot tree shelter, a ventilated tree shelter. With a 5-foot tree shelter and on a good site, good weed control and good genetics, you can get nuts in 2 to 4 years. Okay. 3 to 4 is average, but occasionally people get nuts in 2 years. And then you can get your first commercial harvest probably somewhere around year 6 to 8. And then a more or less mature level of nut production probably around year 15. So how about our favorite 4-letter word in the perennial crop world, deer? Do they mow these to the ground, or do they just nibble, or how bad is it? Well, if you don't put a tree shelter on them, they will certainly mow them to the ground. And if you put a 4-foot shelter on them, they will reach their mouths down inside the top of the shelter and snip them off 6 inches below the top of the shelter. You need an all of 5 feet tree shelter to keep the deer off of them. Cages can work too, and some people prefer to build a cage around each tree. But cages are extremely labor intensive, much more expensive, and they will delay the years to nut production quite a bit. With a cage and without a shelter, it will take 6 to 10 years till you see your first nut. Mhm.
So Tom, what's being used, or what's your recommendation, or what do you see being used for the tree shelter? I mean, what are there certain variety or species that are being used there?
The one I like is made by a company called Plantra, Plantra, out of the Minneapolis area. They make a shelter that's really well ventilated, and that is extremely important for chestnuts.
Okay.
Unventilated tree shelters kill chestnuts.
Got it. So how about fertility? And I guess, this is a hard one to answer, but are they pouring on nitrogen to get these things growing in the early years, or as tree crops, you just kind of let them go once they're established, assuming the soil's okay?
I think most people don't do any fertilization. Most chestnut growers aren't using fertilization, including me. I've never deliberately fertilized my chestnuts. I have accidentally. I used to grow or raise turkeys, goats, and broiler chickens on pasture. And when I got out of those businesses, I planted the fields where I used to have those animals to chestnuts. And when the chestnuts started bearing nuts, the trees that were located in the areas where manure was concentrated had much higher nut production than the ones that were planted farther away from where manure was concentrated. But aside from that, I have no experience with fertilizing chestnuts, and I don't think there's really any research in North America on the subject. But yes, I'm sure that fertility would increase production.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, I'm not sure we really need an increase in production, at least on the best soils. If you're planting Chinese chestnuts on the best soils in the upper Midwest, in my experience and in my opinion, I think the trees are already about as productive as they can handle. And if we try and increase the production too much, the tops of the trees are going to break out from the weight of the nuts.
Yeah, right. So there's been, ups and downs in the performance of the chestnuts with this crazy weather the last 5 years or maybe a decade or so. So what's happening in terms of wet, waterlogged soils, freeze events? Is Chinese chestnut susceptible because of the root rot problem, Phytophthora? Are there issues just because the pollination window is so sensitive, or how does Chinese chestnut fare with this crazy weather?
Well, a late frost in the spring can harm nut production, although I've never seen it eliminate nut production in a year. Even in the year 2012, when the trees leafed out 2 months early and then got nailed by a hard frost, there was still some nut production. A late freeze, an early freeze in the fall, ruined our crop in 2003, I believe. That the nuts froze on the tree just before they were ready to drop, and we lost the entire crop that year.
Gotcha. Because you're harvesting pretty late, right? You haven't even started here. It's September 8, and when's the typical harvest season for you?
In an average year, it starts mid-September, so we're really not late yet, but I think we might end up being late. We've had the nuts start dropping as early as September 6th and as late as September 28th. Wow. So it can vary according to the weather. But yeah, a late hard freeze, an early hard freeze in September could have drastic consequences to the harvest. Cold winter temperatures really have not been much of an issue. But the single worst thing that we've experienced was just waterlogged soils between September 2018 and July 2019. Our soils were saturated for 10 consecutive months. And that was really hard on the trees. They survived it and they're recovering nicely now. But if we'd had another week of rain, it would have been a disaster.
So Tom, do you see that as that the production side of it, is it driven by a growing degree day? Do you follow those kind of things to kind of estimate when that harvest is, or what causes it to be early or late, or is it just, the nuts get so big and they drop?
In a normal year, it seems to start mid-September, but if we have particularly hot weather just leading up to that, that pushes it, the nut drop ahead to maybe early September.
Okay.
If we have cold, cloudy weather leading up to that mid-September, then that can delay the nut drop. It seems to be the weather toward the end of the
So it's not so much during the growing season that so much as influences that as maybe right around that harvest, then, is what you're observing.
Yes.
Okay.
So how are they harvested? Off the ground, I assume? Tree that tall? Are they shaken out?
No, they're not shaken. The nuts aren't ready. They're not ripe until they fall to the ground. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, they are harvested from the ground. And different people have come up with different methods of harvesting. Worldwide, most of them are picked up by hand. We obviously don't do that so much in the US, so people have come up with machines to help. Some people use a vacuum, some people use a motorized harvesting machine. There's a company called FACMA that makes a chestnut harvester that people are using, but what we found works the best for us is a machine called a nut wizard, which is a wire basket about the size and shape of a football that rolls on the end of a pole. And it's about 10 times faster than hand picking. And I calculated that 5 people with nut wizards could stay ahead of the most expensive FACMA machine. And the nut wizards only take 2 drops of oil per year compared to, and they don't make any noise unless you forget to oil them. Then they just squeak. And they pick up the nuts nice and clean, whereas the FACMA machine picks up dirt and rocks and sticks and burrs, and the nuts have to be cleaned and sanitized if they're picked up with a motorized machine.
Sure. So Tom, I just had one quick question on this, Jason. Is it a living mulch underneath the tree, or does it drop into a weed-free, plant-free area, or how do you manage the area where the nuts are going to drop?
Well, I prefer to have them dropping on grass.
Okay.
That way the nuts stay clean. And there's a species of grass called creeping red fescue that is slow to establish, but once it's established, it's extremely durable, tolerant of heavy traffic, shade tolerant.
So let's talk a little bit about post-harvest handling, processing. So you're picking them up off the ground, the day of. What are you doing over the next couple of days with those? Can you just throw them in the shed? Do they need to start drying? What do you do?
Well, we're doing things a little bit different from most people. We're having our customers do our harvesting for us. We loan them nut wizards, but they come and do the work and immediately take them home with them. And that works great because it eliminates the cost of harvesting and sanitation and refrigeration and packaging and shipping and advertising. And when you eliminate all those costs, the only thing left is profit. And that's by far and away the most profitable way to produce chestnuts. But other people do harvest them from the ground. And if they're using a vacuum or a FACMA harvester, they have to separate the nuts from debris, wash the nuts, sanitize them, sort them into size categories, and then either sell them immediately or put them into refrigeration.
Okay. So they have to be cooled right after they're picked for the most part?
Yes, they should be, if they're going to be stored, they should be stored in refrigeration, because the shell on the chestnut is really thin, and the kernel inside is mostly water. So they can lose moisture very quickly through the shell of the nut. And that's very expensive water if you're allowing it to evaporate. So you can slow that by keeping them in refrigeration. They'll also store a lot longer if you keep them refrigerated.
And there's, is there any husk removal, or it's just the shell that has to be? And I guess in the chestnut world, it's not shelling so much, it's called peeling. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. The shell on the chestnut is thin and leathery like a peanut shell. And we talk about peeling the chestnuts, not cracking them or shelling them.
So let's maybe shift a little bit to the industry and marketing and where you see things going there. So maybe to start off, how much chestnut production is there in the upper Midwest, say Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota? What's the range of production right now geographically?
Well, the Prairie Grove chestnut growers sold 85,000 pounds of chestnuts in 2018. There was a big drop in 2019 because there was a big drop in production due to the bad weather, which is pretty much Midwest wide. And I think Prairie Grove chestnut growers, I think, sells the vast majority of chestnuts produced in Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri. There's really not much produced in Minnesota or Wisconsin yet, although there's hope that that can change.
Is that primarily a genetics issue, or it just hasn't caught on? Or
yeah, I think there just aren't very many growers in Minnesota or Wisconsin yet, although there are quite a few people who are starting to plant them now, but it's going to take a while for production to ramp up in those areas. Southeast Iowa had a kind of a big head start a bit over 25 years ago, and I think there are over 200 farms in Iowa where they have planted chestnuts commercially now, and as far as I know, that's more than any other state.
Mm-hmm. Any idea how many acres that might be? I guess it depends on density and all the rest, but some ballpark.
Yeah, it's probably a couple of hundred at least, but I really don't have any way of estimating that yet.
Sure.
And
gotcha.
I know who planted them and how many acres that could cover, but how many of those trees were properly cared for and survived and are going to come into production is anybody's guess.
Yeah, I would just think in Wisconsin, you mentioned the pH being a little on the acidic side. That tends to be Jason's part of the world, our part of the world here in Chippewa County, because to get any kind of production, we're liming everything to get rid of the acidity. So I would think, the genetics allow it. This might be a potential for our part of the world here.
Yeah, I think at least the southern third of Wisconsin is certainly viable for commercial chestnut production.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if the harvest isn't until mid-September. Like we said at the start of the podcast, I just had my first frost. So if we're talking end of September, might be too far north here. But Wisconsin's a big state from north to south, and northern Wisconsin.
I don't think chestnut production in the northern third of Wisconsin would be possible at all, and in the central third, probably not commercially viable. Is
there such a thing as a normal year? But in a normal year, what percentage might grade out as extra large versus the other size classes?
That is extremely variable according to, or determined by the location where they're grown and by the genetics of the tree, and by several other factors also, including the crop load that was on that tree the previous year, and the soil moisture conditions as the nuts are sizing up. But And that's changed dramatically over the years. When Prairie Grove nut growers first started, it went by the name of Southeast Iowa nut growers. And back then, I think we were at around 5% small, 40% medium, maybe 50 or 60% large, and then another very small percentage extra large. But as the genetics of the trees are improving and better genetics are coming into production, the percentage of extra large is increasing every year.
So the nurseries that are selling plants, are they saving seed from their best plants? Do they have controlled crossing blocks? So they're selling, say, full sibling plantings. Are they getting all their material from this private breeder, Mike? I think that's what you said.
Like I said, Mike is doing this in his backyard, so he has a few handfuls of nuts of each variety. Not able to supply the whole nursery industry, but a lot of the best material that's available now are descendants of things that Mike Nave developed over the years.
Okay. And then, so the nurseries are saving seed from, say, those best plants, so they're half sibs, or what are growers getting? Are they getting?
Sometimes they're full sibs, but usually they're half siblings.
Okay, got it. And what traits are most important, would you say, that growers are looking for right now? Just overall health and vigor, or are there specific traits in the plants that are desirable right now?
Well, most people are looking for large nut size, and larger nuts are more profitable to produce than smaller sizes, even though the smaller sizes are actually more in demand with the customer. And that's because smaller nuts are harder to pick up than larger nuts, and you have to pick up more of them before you have a pound of them. So even though at Prairie Grove the medium size is the most in demand, medium sized nuts are not as profitable to grow as large nuts. They're still very profitable though. The only one I would tell people to avoid is small nuts, because even though there's a good market for small nuts, they're so hard to pick up. They take so long to pick up, take so much labor to pick them up, that eats up the profit.
Gotcha.
And small nuts do sell for a lower price than medium, large, and extra large.
Uh-huh. So where are they grown across the world right now? Are there main countries that are growing chestnuts?
China produces around 85% of the world's chestnuts, and always have. That the Chinese chestnut is by far and away the #1 chestnut in the world commercially, by more than 5 orders of magnitude more important than all the rest put together. Mm-hmm. Japanese chestnut is a minor species grown in Japan, but the Japanese don't like Japanese chestnuts. They prefer Chinese chestnuts. Then the other commercial chestnut is the European chestnut. Has been in decline for many decades due to chestnut blight, and European chestnuts are gradually being replaced in Europe with Japanese European hybrids, which at least have some resistance to the blight.
Okay. How does there aren't a whole lot of them left, but the American chestnuts, how do those nuts compare to Chinese chestnuts in flavor, size?
The American chestnuts are much smaller. They're about the size of the smallest Chinese chestnuts. If we mixed American chestnuts in with our production, they would grade out small all the time. They are sweeter than Chinese chestnuts. Their peeling ability and pellicle characteristics are closer to Chinese chestnuts than they are to Japanese and European. So you can eat, like with Chinese chestnuts, you can eat the kernel even if the pellicle hasn't been peeled off. And you can do that with American chestnuts, whereas the Japanese and European chestnuts have a pellicle that's thick and leathery and furry and bitter and astringent. So you that pellicle has to be removed for humans to consider the nut edible. And Japanese and European chestnuts have kernel surfaces that make removing that pellicle difficult, whereas the pellicle comes off easily on Chinese and American chestnuts.
Are they primarily still eaten as a holiday snack kind of food, or are they catching on as more mainstream?
Well, it depends on if you're asking about Americans, Anglo-Americans, or ethnic groups who grew up in other parts of the world where the chestnuts are known and appreciated. The ethnic customers eat them whenever they can get them, and not just at holidays. I think probably only Americans are the only people who just want them at Christmas time, and that's just because of the Christmas song.
Because of Bing Crosby or whoever it was.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Americans are probably some of the worst chestnut customers in the world, because they only want 1 pound. They only want it at Christmas time, and you have to explain to them what to do with them.
Right.
Whereas a Bosnian family will want between 300 and 800 pounds as soon as they can get them, and they know exactly what to do with them.
Huh.
But I'd much rather make one 800-pound sale to a Bosnian than 800 individual sales to Americans.
Yeah, right. So what is involved from the customer standpoint? If I were to go to Prairie Grove and buy not 1 pound, I'm going to buy 20 pounds. It looks like that's the minimum. And they come to me in the mail. What do I do next? How do I ensure I get maximum quality out of those?
We'll store them in refrigeration. That's absolutely important. But they'll arrive in the fresh state, and they really should be cured in order to develop the maximum flavor. And curing involves taking them out of the refrigerator and just exposing them to air at room temperature for a few days to a couple of weeks, depending on the size of the nut. And in the curing process, the chestnut will lose up to half of its original moisture content. And the kernel will shrink and go from being rigid like a fresh carrot to being kind of soft and spongy like a carrot would be if you left it out on your kitchen table for 3 weeks. And when the kernel shrinks and gets soft, that's when its flavor is at its best. But they don't store well that way. So you keep the chestnuts in refrigeration, take them out of the refrigerator to cure them, and then as soon as they're cured, consume them immediately. Or you can freeze cured chestnuts and store them long-term that way. But you don't want to freeze fresh chestnuts, because that ruins them. We found out that in 2003, when he had that hard freeze, wiped out our chestnut crop, even the squirrels won't eat chestnuts that have been frozen.
Well, they're picky, apparently.
So are they? When are they roasted? After they're cured? When they're still wet?
Roasted chestnuts will taste best if they're cured first.
Okay. And they're peeled and then roasted?
Yes.
Got it.
The roasting process with Chinese chestnuts, when you roast them and then open the shell, the pellicle or the skin that covers the kernel usually sticks with the shell. So just the roasting process peels them. That's not the case with European and Japanese chestnuts, though.
Gotcha. So as the industry, it sounds like, can sell pretty much everything fresh that you can grow right now, but is there some thought about doing the curing, selling cured selling cured chestnuts, or even pre-roasted for the customer, just to make it easier for consumers? Or is there's no need to do it right now because the demand for fresh is so high?
The demand for fresh is so high and will be for decades to come. Processing chestnuts just isn't justified economically right now, because for example, to make chestnut flour, it requires 10 pounds of fresh chestnuts to make 4 pounds of chestnut flour. And then the cost of taking those fresh chestnuts and producing flour out of them is high enough that you would have gotten a lot more money just selling the nuts as they fell from the tree versus converting them into flour.
Well, anytime you can sell water, it's a good thing.
Yes, and this is very expensive water.
Are there other parts of the country where chestnuts might be grown, say California, and grow anything? Can they grow chestnuts, or do they need a vernalization period?
Yeah, chestnuts are grown in Washington, Oregon, and California, pretty much anywhere east of the Great Plains in the eastern U.S. And they'll grow as far south as Tampa, Florida. But south of Tampa, there isn't enough cold in the wintertime for chestnuts to survive.
Gotcha. And these are all pretty much Chinese chestnuts across these other production regions? Or is there some more of this Japanese European hybrid?
Yeah, Michigan has been struggling with Japanese European hybrids for about 25 years. And I probably will continue to do that for some time to come. But everybody else in the eastern U.S. is growing Chinese chestnuts. There's a chestnut called the Dunstan hybrid, which is really, it's a Chinese chestnut with a tiny amount of American genetics in it. So technically it's a hybrid, but its characteristics are pretty much pure Chinese. And a lot of people are growing those, but mostly it's Chinese.
And is Iowa the biggest production region still in the U.S., or are there bigger growers out west?
In terms of pounds, Michigan and probably California are ahead of Iowa at the moment, but we're going to catch up pretty quick as the new plantings come into production because there's so many more growers here.
So is there a area, or if you want to learn more about, do you have field days down there, or, open houses or anything like that? Or is this just, if you're interested in growing it, they always say contact your extension agent. Well, maybe Jason knows, I know he knows a lot more than I do, but a lot of us are trying to learn about these crops as we go along, or where the potential is. But do you guys offer open houses, or is there, some trainings or something like that where people can learn a little more about how to grow them?
The University of Missouri Center for Agroforestry has a lot of information about chestnut growing. Chestnut Growers of America is another good source of information, and Northern Nut Growers Association. We used to have field days pretty regularly, but we stopped doing that recently. We still have private tours by appointment, but we don't have any scheduled field days anymore, and probably won't for a while.
Yep, sure.
What's plant availability looking like from nurseries? Is this something where you got to order 2 years out, or can you get excited in February and have trees ready to plant that spring? Or
well, I can't speak for other nurseries, but with our nursery, you can start ordering them in late November, and as long as you get them ordered by end of January, you're probably okay. But we've been selling out earlier and earlier every year, and I would guess that other nurseries are doing the same.
And Tom, what specifically are you selling from the chestnuts? Are these bare root that you're digging in the spring, or are you planting to order and then ship in the fall? Or
no, we don't ship at all, for one thing. We used to produce bed grown bare root trees, but the demand for the potted trees has been so high that we just never had any seed left over for producing bare root material. So all of our stock is potted, and all of it has to be picked up at the nursery.
Got it. And these are 1-year-olds, so you plant them in the spring, ready to?
Yeah, they're in a lot of cases they're only a couple of months old. We start them in late April or early May, and The first ones are ready to plant as early as late May.
Mhm.
And most of them are ready to go by the end of June. And I'd say about 2/3 of them are planted around that time. And then the rest are planted around late August or early September.
Well, Tom, thanks so much for your time. Hopefully the rain stops here. We can all get back outside. But
Well, we actually need the rain. So.
oh yeah, you guys have had quite a year between. Did you get derecho effects, or are you far enough south?
I think I think we caught the edge of it. Our winds didn't get over 80.
Yeah, between drought, derecho,
been,
COVID.
Yeah. Yeah, we were hit by a derecho 22 years ago, though, a direct hit.
All right. Well, so maybe we should say a few words. The Perennial Farm Gathering. I see the Savannah Institute bag there behind you. Sounds like they're going to do an online version of their Perennial Farm Gathering. For those of you that aren't familiar, Savannah Institute, it's a nonprofit organization working to advance agroforestry across the upper Midwest, and a real champion of a lot of these emerging fruit and nut crops, chestnuts front and center. And they usually do a big conference in December, but because of the COVID restrictions, they're going to do it all online this year, virtual. And that just gives an opportunity for more people to participate, I think, because they don't have to travel. So anyway, if anyone's interested, because it's always been a great conference to me to learn about this stuff and hear from all the people involved in all these cool new crops. So hopefully people can join that. Well, with that, Tom, thank you. Appreciate your time. And brought to you by the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension.